One of the most gut-wrenching thing our parents did your my parents never really wanted kids. I was an only child and pretty much an accident pregnancy from what relatives have told me. My childhood was intentionally good, but after I started growing out of the cute and adorable phase, my parents were less inclined to spend time with my they both worked and had their own business that they started together. That business was their life. I always came second to eat any other close family members. He stays away and I barely knew anything about them until I was an adult. So I had no other family around my entire childhood. I was particularly raised by TV and my school teachers, my own birthdays. By the time I became a teenager, were often spent without my parents. They just give me some money and tell me to go out and buy whatever I wanted. It was more or less them. Same with Christmas and sometimes even back to school. Showing after I turned without my parents and they gave me some money and tell me to go out to buy whatever I wanted. And sometimes even back to school shopping after I turned 10, my parents no longer wanted to buy a tree at all. I had to convince my parents to buy a fake one that I could build up and then take apart later every year. When I turned 16, I asked my parents if I could work part-time for them and their businesses. They rejected me immediately and told me they did not have any open spots. They may as well just come right out and said they did not want me. Then after I turned 18, my parents told me that since I was an adult, they expected me to move out as soon as I was able. I was working part-time because I was still in high school and I did not have anywhere near enough save for college not long after high school. Indeed, my parents told me to pack up and move out. They got an official evictions notice that gave me 30 days and everything. They did not even help me move. I had to get help from a friend's dad who owns a truck. I ended up entering a crime department and working retail. I had no real life experience and no time for college. After just a few months, I got fired because my manager legitimately had it out for me and wrote me up for the stupidest things. I ended up going broke pretty fast because I was terrible at managing my own money and could not find steady employment, so I lost my apartment. I went back to my parents begging for help, but they refused to take me. It not even for a little while to get back on my feet. I ended up homeless and living out for a tent in someone's backyard during the winter. My friends had all moved on to college, some in other states, and I was just a broke kid taking whatever work I could to stay alive. My salvation came when one of the neighbors of my parents found out I was living out of a tent and offered to take me in for a little while so I would not freeze. She helped me badger my parents into telling me how to get in touch with all the other members of my estranged family. My parents did not want to tell us at all. My guess is it was out of fear of being judged for throwing their scene so another way. They did. Eventually, they called up the info and gave me a list of contact details. Then they told me out to brother them again. Thankfully, I was able to call my grandparents from my father's side of the family. They were very surprised and happy to hear from me because they had not seen since I was an infant. After learning about my situation, my grandparents flew me over to live with them as soon as they could. They basically adopted me. My parents did not even see me off at the airport. Despite being invited to, I had zero contact with them for pretty much a decade. My grandparents said they despised my parents for treating me so poorly and legally disowned them by striking them from their wills. I'm told my parents were not happy to hear that. However, legally did not really matter because they were plenty well off. I did not need anything from my grandparents. How wrong that statement turned out to be. After about a year of living with my grandparents, I was able to afford community college, I get an associate degree, got a decent job, and eventually my grandparents offered to sell me their house so they could retire to Arizona. My grandma wanted to live in a warmer climate as the cold. Winter was getting harder and harder on our health every year. I was sad to see them go, but I happily bought the house. They sold it to me for 1/3 of its value. I will have to pay it off in a few more years. My positions at that time forced me to go away on the road politically. As a result, I can end up away from home for weeks at a time. One day in late 2020, I came home after being away for over 2 weeks. Upon arrival, I found a large white van I did not recognize in my driveway. I was getting ready to call the police when I noticed the van had the logo for my parents' business on the side of it. All I felt was that my parents had broke in somehow and were living out of my home. On top of that, they had the nerve to greet me like we are buddy that moment. I walked in. I told them to get the hell out, but they refused because it was Grandma and Grandpa's house. I said it was not Grandma and Grandpa's house. I said it was not their house anymore since they would sold it to me, and when they returned I told them they would have known that if they were in any way involved in my life, but they threw me to the wolves. 10 years period with no life experience. We argued that and they refused to leave. My father told me it was his parents' house fast, and that meant he and my mother had the right no had to live there if they wanted. I walked right into my bedroom, locked the door, and called the police. When the cops showed up, they were of the no help. My hands. Their parents came to them, and they had already been there long enough to have residency, which was a complete lie. Unfortunately, I had no cameras to prove that were not there a month. My neighbors had no cameras either. As a result, it was my word against my parents about how long they would really been there, and they were climbing sweaters. Right, they told the police they had a verbal rental agreement with me and told that I was trying to illegally evict them for no reason. My mother even put on the waterworks when saying that the police told me it was a family dispute and a film filed evictions with the court to get them out since this was in 2020. Getting to court for anything took longer because of the pandemic. Meanwhile, my parents were squatting in my house rent free and rubbing it in my face from the information. I got out of them. The business went bankrupt and they sold off almost everything they had to pay their debts. All they had left was the van and a few personal belongings, so they expected to live in my house rent free for the foreseeable future. They were working to both of then soon got new jobs. Father as a delivery driver, my mother as a sales associate. They were making money, and the only things they contributed to were electricity and water utilities. They basically just handed me a 100 bill every month and said I should be grateful they were paying me anything. Anytime I tried to discuss proper rent with them, they just said I would it to them delivering fee because I took 18 years of their lives. They then told me going to be thankful that they were not demanding my money. Therefore, that time when I argued back my big death return to stop helping with utilize. Altogether, I also at my words and that ended up calling my grandparents to explain the situation to them. They were very unhappy and spoke with my parents, but they still said they had the right to stay in my home. They refused to budge. My grandpa told me he was sorry it had come to this and that if they did not solve me in the house, my parents would not have invaded. I told him not to worry. I would already filed for illegal eviction and would get it soon enough. I told him my parents already knew that they were no board time. I made sure to say that yeah, short of them too. They responded with a silent treatment. My father was away most of the time. They made delivery be held 6 days a week, which was a job really not too liking. My mother basically tried to take over my house in her spare time she demanded. I let her rearrange my living room. At one point, she even tried to force me to give her and my father the master bedroom. She argued that they were my parents. Anything he didn't ask to born, and it's a normal obligation for parents to raise their own children. He told her they were trying to exert dominance to try and keep more from kicking them out. Obligation of my parents that the children her knew her trying to exert tried to keep on me for keeping them out. I let her know her time was coming soon enough finally. After 4 months and now into early 2021, I managed to take my parents to court over the scooting. We only needed to go to court because they fought the evictions and tried to gaslight me into deciding if they tried to use the fact that it was formerly my grandparents' house in attempt to use their 100 monthly payments as some sort of leverage. However, there was no real rental agreement and they were smart enough not to forge one as that would have been fraud in the end. The judge ordered that they needed to be out on a maximum of 30 days because they have zero claim on my house. After a court, they confronted me and said they were disappointed me for kicking out my own flesh and blood. I could not help but laugh. I called them hypocrites because that's exactly what they did to me without a care in the world for my well-being. They had no love for me, so I have no love for them. I owe them nothing. They just tried to act like everything that was mine was theirs, but they had no right to call themselves my parents because they would be never really act like it. I called them a pair of snowboarding and now broke lyrical narcissus. Their faces then told them to get their affairs in order. They knew I did not hesitate to call the police. And they did not leave my house when the 30 days were over. My father looked enraged, but my mother stopped him from saying to doing anything by grabbing a shoulder and shaking her head. He snapped at me and walked away, just laughed in his face. They eventually left, but not without a lot of difficulty. Their final month was spent with them, encouraging me to try and make up my change. My mind all completely ignoring me. I put up a calendar in the living room and checked off each day before they had to leave with a red marker sheet. Exact day they were to able out was marked with a big and red circle. I still remember the final day was March 2nd. My parents waited until the exact day they had to leave my home for good before they finally left. What's even funnier is that they had been so convinced they could make me let them stay that they did not bother to look for apartment. Even funnier that they had been so convinced they could make me let them stay that they did not bother to look for an apartment. Until after the court eviction went through, my mother spent weeks scribbling to find an apartment. They had got a teeny and cramped studio apartment in the next city about because it was the only thing they could find on such short notice. It was a lot like what I had to do when I was 18. Quite ironic. I drove my mother about to see it all, and the apartment was terrible. The walls were baby barf green, and the carpet looked like it was 20 years old. The only window just had a view of a brick wall outside, and there was no dishwasher. The stove was the smallest one I would ever seen. The toilet looked like it needed to be replaced, and there was also too little to stop noise from neighbors. There were already two people loudly fighting in the adjacent apartment while we were there. My mother went out of her way to give me sad eyes, and the whole time she kept dropping hints that I should be feeling guilty for reducing them to live in such a place. I just acted obviously to it all until she finally stopped. They signed the lease right away and moved what little stuff they had into the apartment over the weekend. They also ended up demanding the queen-size bed, dresser, and flat screen TV from my guest room. I told them to just take them damn things because I no longer wanted them in the house. After they spent at me like I was treating them as though they were deserted and demanded nothing more than the moment they had to leave for good. They started changing the lock of etc. doors. All their stuff was at the apartment, and they would spend their last night in my guest room. When the move was finally over, the watch had started ripping in the old lock of their front door. As they were getting into the bin, they said nothing. I said nothing. They just sat and watched me for a while until I heard the knee broken up on them. They finally left. I waited massive high. Say of release the second that went down the road of figure karma and figurely finally calm and for them, and they could live under a rock for all care, but no my grandparent. Unfortunately, they were basically on track of being right back on to where they used to be in life period to the pandemic. I will be already Google their new business. It's like it's doing all there. Many positive reviews and everything. I am pretty freaking resentful. Truth be told, they put me through being homeless, squatted pretty much for free at my house from on then. Not right back to being the snobby wine drinking business people they used to be. If karma is real, it's talking to them long.